Thank you. And I am pronouncing your last name correctly, Bonar?
Yes.
All right, thank you. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate?
I do.
All right, thank you, sir. Ms. Ryan?
Good morning, Mr. Bonar.
Good morning.
Are you the same Jeffrey Bonar who filed direct testimony on behalf of the King Intervenors on July 24th of 2023?
Yes.
If I asked you the same questions today, would you give substantially the same answers?
Yes.
Is there anything in that testimony that you need to correct?
Nope.
All right. Your Honor, I move the admission of Jeffrey Bonar's direct testimony.
Your Honor, just a clarification.
Yes, sir. You could just, Mr. Dublinsky, if you want to make a statement.
No, I just want to ask a question for clarification. Ms. Ryan mentioned that this testimony was offered on behalf of the King Intervenors. I want to make clear, in part to avoid the fight that I think Ms. Ryan was anticipating, that this witness is being offered for Ms. Hirth, and that in fact Ms. Hirth refiled Mr. Bonar's testimony as part of her case. Is that a correct understanding, Ms. Ryan?
Yes, Ms. Hirth refiled this on September 6th with a request for him to testify on her behalf.
All right, thank you.
All right. You did move to, yep. Any objections? All right, seeing none, we will admit those items.
With that, I would tender the witness for cross-examination.
I believe, Mr. Jorde, you are the first, so he is yours.
Thank you. Just in case there's any technical thing, I would re-offer the exhibit on behalf of all of the landowners as well, if there's any technicality of, who offers the exhibit. I mean, I think once the exhibit's in, it's fair game, but I'm just going to make that statement for the record. We would also offer it in support of all of our landowner clients. Is there no objections? Okay. Sir, cap CO2 has come up a lot. I can just tell you in other states, we've never met before, have we, or talked before?
We have not.
Okay. And I've heard about you in South Dakota extensively. One of the criticisms about cap CO2 is that allegedly you don't have the ability to deal with the volumes that these ethanol plants in Iowa could potentially contribute to, say, a pipeline. And I'd wonder if do you disagree with that? Can you clarify that?
Completely disagree. Our methanol technology is delivered in a shipping crate, and a shipping crate handles about 10,000 metric tons of CO2, and if you need to handle 100,000 metric tons, you deliver 10 shipping crates. We are an early company, and so the manufacturing of shipping crates in quantity is still to be put in place, but theoretically the technology scales quite nicely, and it's worth saying that our technology compared to conventional methanol technology requires far, far less land. Conventional methanol plant will require 20 or 30 acres. Ours requires a shipping crate or 5 or 10 shipping crates per ethanol plant. And we use 30 or 40% less electricity than conventional methanol technology. So in fact, we're ideally suited to the ethanol industry and will easily scale up to satisfy every ethanol plant that wants to use it.
Now, do you have, you said you're early on, do you have any of these containers that have been tested? Where are you in the process?
Yeah, there's one shipping crate in operation in Poland, which is where the technology was originally invented. Our company has exclusive rights in the U.S. to the technology. And we're focused on the ethanol industry because it's a huge opportunity for the ethanol industry, and it really, really well suited to an ethanol plant.
So when you say you're early, you're further along than Summit, who doesn't have a single inch of pipeline in the ground, correct?
agree with that. Yes.
All right. And so what was the capacity again per crate? And are these like the shipping containers, like the 53-foot containers, or how large are they containers?
40 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot.
Okay. So the ones we see on going down the road are on rail cars, about that size.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And intentionally, it's designed to be a standard module like that. The capacity is 10,000 metric tons. I know we don't normally deal with metric tons. So for a average ethanol plant, that will end up being 10, maybe 12 shipping crates.
And then how does it work? I'm not a scientist. I mean, once a container, I guess, has reached its capacity of 10,000, then obviously you go to the next container, and then at some point, where do those containers go? Can you just explain it at a high level?
Sure. It's actually very simple. There's two key inputs, the CO2 and hydrogen. And the hydrogen, they both go into a very high pressure reactor, kind of buried deep in the shipping crate. And what comes out is methanol. And that methanol can then be delivered to the tanker cars that are already sitting on a siding at most ethanol plants. So you can't mix the ethanol and the methanol, but the exact same tanker cars work just fine as long as you clean them between when you switch chemicals.
Okay, and so do you need to have what type of capture equipment, if any, to get from the stack where the CO2 is now being emitted into the atmosphere to get to your container, your process?
It's a good question. Part of why ethanol plants are such a great fit for this technology is they're already doing the cleaning and the purification of CO2. They want to grab out every bit of ethanol that's still kind of hanging around. So they deliver very pure CO2, very high quality, makes our process super simple. So it's a very good match. At our first facility at Atkins Energy in Lena, Illinois, which is about 30 miles east of Dubuque, just to place it, there'll be a 100-foot pipe that will move from the scrubber, the output of their scrubber where it would normally go into the air, and they'll move the CO2 directly to our shipping crate.
Okay, and I take it that wouldn't cost the $65 million that Summit estimates for its capture facility on site at ethanol plants?
I have not heard that number. It's wildly too high.
Okay.
So,
well, the chief commercial officer testified here under oath that it could cost approximately $65 million just for the facility on site to take from the ethanol plant and to pressurize to put into the pipeline.
That's complete. I mean, again, that's complete nonsense. So,
well, in terms of your business model, I mean,
right. That's
yes,
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
You're not disputing what their business model is.
Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah. Okay. Our business model, we already have the exact placement of the pipe and where it's going to go and how it'll hook up to the scrubber. So, and it's a trivial cost in the overall project.
And then, so is it true? There's been some criticism that this really can't be an on-site kind of self-contained way to capture and process the CO2. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I completely disagree. Now, two things just to be clear. It does require a lot of electricity, so we have to find the renewable electricity. If it's going to be green methanol, which is by far the most valuable form of methanol, it has to be renewable electricity. So we have to find renewable electricity that's appropriate for each site. For the site at Atkins, there's a nuclear power plant nearby that's net zero carbon electricity, and most of it at night is not used. So it's a really attractive opportunity there. It would be very inexpensive for us to supply the electricity. Other places, there's wind or solar energy that's underutilized that we can use, water energy that's underutilized. So there's many different ways we can solve the electricity problem, but it'll be a site-by-site decision. And in terms of our costs, that's one of the key issues we have to work out to make sure a particular ethanol plant will work.
So, okay, the key cost meaning availability of renewable energy. Are you aware that in Iowa, it's arguably, if not the most largest producer of wind energy in the nation?
We are aware of that, and we also understand that in many cases that wind energy is not fully utilized, that there's amounts of it that they would love to find a buyer for. So, and we can operate at different times of the day. We can turn the process up to full volume or lower volume. So we have the opportunity to kind of leverage that kind of variability over the course of the day.
How many millions of gallons of water do you need for your containers to work at each ethanol plant on an annual basis?
So for a 90 million gallon ethanol facility, we will require roughly 67 million gallons of water
per year.
Per year. That's,
okay.
Yeah, that's annual numbers. And we do understand that in some cases ethanol plants are already using too much municipal water, and we would not be interested in adding to that burden. And so again, part of what we have to do to site a methanol facility is make sure that there's a way to get the water. We can cover the capital costs of adding a new well or improving the water situation, and that is figured into our pricing, but it has to be determined. It's not something we can just assume going in.
So in terms of water usage, tell me about the differences, if you know, from the water that would have to go through the capture facility and interact with the different chemicals and Summit's process versus what the water looks like coming out. Obviously, the water is going to be discharged from somewhere through that process. Is that water contaminated in some way, or can it recharge back into the ground? How does that work?
In fact, our water is distilled water. So we expect to sell it. It won't be a major part of our revenues, but we expect to sell the distilled water that comes out of our process. It won't be in any way contaminated. It'll actually be purified.
Okay, so even though you might be using more water, give or take, at some of the locations, what comes out isn't contaminated with other chemicals in the pipeline. It's actually a purer form of water.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. And would you be willing, if a municipality had a restriction or a condition, for instance, a conditional use permit, that you had to contribute, say, back to the community or that locality a certain amount of that water being used, would you be open to that?
Absolutely.
All right, very good, because you understand there is some concern that Summit might be using water and that when it's discharged, it's something worse than what it was and unusable, but you would be willing to work with the communities in that regard?
Absolutely, and it's part of the permitting we're already involved in at Atkins at the first facility, just to confirm that and make sure that the municipality is comfortable with it.
All right. And then, so let's just continue the life cycle. So that's the process of creating it. This is completely on-site solution, no need for a pipeline or eminent domain, but who's the end user? I mean, is there actually a market for this that would justify the project?
Yeah, it's interesting. Monday and Tuesday, I was at the methanol conference in Houston, and green methanol is the hot topic at the conference. The shipping industry has standardized on green methanol as their next generation fuel. There's over 200 ships already been ordered that will be dual engine or just green methanol ships. Disney Cruises has ordered a green methanol ship. So that, and that's just one of the markets. Methanol is critical to rigid plastics. So people who want to build net zero plastics will need green methanol. So it's a huge market. One of the buyers of a big methanol brokerage if you will, said that ethanol plants are sitting on a gold mine, that it's just really, really attractive opportunity for ethanol plants. The other thing, I'll just tell you one more story just to give you a sense of the interest. Someone said, well, we're only interested if you can deliver 200 million gallons per year, which of course we can't do right now, and that'll be 2 years from now, something like that, before we could reach that kind of quantity. And I laughed and said, well, okay, well, we'll have to talk later. And she said, well, everyone says that, so maybe we should talk now. So there's just lots of demand, lots of interest, lots of potential buyers. It's a juicy opportunity for our company, but also for the ethanol industry.
And then generally your economics, I don't want you to get into trade secrets or confidential information, but in terms of contracting with the ethanol plants, how does that work? Do they share in the revenue from your end buyers, or is it a fixed fee you pay for taking the CO2? How does it work?
The basic model is, so we're expecting the methanol. So remember I mentioned that $90 million average ethanol plant. I'm sorry, 90 million gallon average ethanol plant. The basic economics is that we can make green methanol that'll be worth between $200 and $400 million, depending on whether it's the price at the beginning of this year or the price that the analysts are projecting. So out of that money, we're going to cover the capital costs and the operating costs of the equipment. The ethanol plant does not need to cover those costs. We will. And what's left over will be shared with the ethanol plant at a formula that is confidential. But it'll be a substantial new revenue source for the ethanol plant.
And is the base of your revenue source taxpayer-funded tax credits, or it's actually selling to industry who is the buyer in a commercial enterprise?
Selling. The tax credits are a sweetener on top. They make it that much more attractive for our investors, and they make it easier for us to get the business done. But the business is based on the revenue from what we make, not based on the tax credits.
And would you say the revenue is the lion's share of the revenue from the commercial transaction is the lion's share of the overall gross revenue when you kick in the tax credits, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Do you understand that the 45Z, the tax credits available for the producer of ethanol currently expire? They have a 3-year shelf life. Do you know that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. But because you're going to engage in long-term commercial transactions, do you believe your revenue model is more viable?
Absolutely. And again, the tax credits, it's not just 45Z. There's other tax credits that would apply to what we're doing. And they're attractive. They make it easier for us to raise money. It makes it easier to get everyone involved. But they're not what we're building our core business model on at all.
Right. I just wanted to be clear about that, to differentiate what you're proposing between what the, for instance, Summit, Navigator, these other pipelines are proposing.
Understood.
All right. And then, did you just have your testimony, sir, or were there any other exhibits attached, or was it your affidavit that you prepared? Was that the sum and substance of your testimony here, your pre-filed testimony?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. I guess then lastly, I think you mentioned that the containers, they would typically be transported via rail to the end consumer. Is that right? Or trucked? Or both?
You mean the methanol containers?
The methanol containers to get to your end customer.
Yes, we're still discussing where to start building them after we get the first one up at Atkins. But yeah, they'll be built somewhere in the kind of Midwest.
Okay.
So,
but in terms of then the delivery of a full container, once it's become full with the molecules, that then typically is shipped on rail to the end user.
Oh, no, that's not how it works. The containers with our equipment sits at the ethanol plant.
Okay.
So you feed it CO2, you feed it electricity, you feed it some water, and it produces methanol. So, yeah.
And then how do we get the methanol to Disney Cruise?
You put it in a tanker car on the railroad siding already existing at the ethanol plant, and then a train goes to the Gulf Coast typically, but other places as well, full of ethanol, but we would add cars that would be full of methanol.
Okay, so the trains that are already running, the infrastructure that already exists would be utilized.
Yeah, and that's, by the way, partially why the methanol brokers say you're sitting on a gold mine, because so much of the logistics is already in place.
For the ethanol plant.
For the ethanol plant, exactly.
Right, because they don't need to have a new pipeline or new expensive capture equipment.
Or even a new railroad facility.
Okay. All right, sir, appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Whippel. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Jorde covered a lot of what I wanted to dig into as well, so I just want to tack on a couple things. You're talking about your company being eligible for some federal tax credits as well. Can you identify which ones exactly? It's not the 45Q or Z programs for your company, right?
Well, I want to be a little careful because the rules have not even been issued on all of these programs, and we're working with an expert on both exactly, making our case to qualify for the different programs and verifying the reduction in carbon intensity that the use of our technology will provide. So that's a matter of real expertise to put that together and make the case to the regulatory agencies. That said, 45Q, 45V as in Victor, and 45Z are all potential sources of tax credits and incentives for us. And we will have to make the case for each of them. So, and again, we have a small line in our business model that wouldn't it be great if we get all these, but it's not a requirement to make our model work.
Are those stackable in your application of the technology?
They are. And again, I don't want to get into all the technical details of how we do it, but our advisors tell us they are.
Okay, and without divulging anything particularly trade secret, are you keeping the tax credits and letting the ethanol plants take the credits they're eligible for, and you're each keeping your own credits?
It will have to be negotiated because it's a little tricky. Some of those credits only apply to certain entities. So again, without getting into all the details, some of them will be exclusively for the ethanol plant. Some of them will be for other entities involved.
Okay. Have you reviewed the testimony some witnesses have filed in this proceeding? Any of them? Have you read Mr. Brookhammer's or Mr. Pearl's?
I did. I definitely reviewed Mr. Brookhammer's. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yep. And so there are some calculations in there about the benefits on to ethanol on a per gallon basis, and some discussion of the ability to reduce carbon intensity. Have you run comparable calculations for your model in terms of value add to ethanol?
We have, and again, I want to state this is primarily has been done by Atkins, so I'm not really, this isn't our work, it's Atkins' work, and it's still to be fully prepared in the format it needs to be prepared to get this consideration, but they're looking at a 50-point reduction in the carbon intensity just from the methanol production, and that's quite significant. So that is the prime motivation for the CEO of the Atkins Energy ethanol plant. It's just a big win for him and his shareholders.
And so the bottom line is you're able to deliver comparable carbon intensity reductions.
Absolutely.
And comparable enhancements in ethanol revenues from those markets that require lower carbon.
Absolutely.
Are you currently actively approaching local jurisdictions in Iowa to find sites to develop here?
Right at this moment, we're focused on getting that site in Atkins up and running. We have a number of ethanol plants we've had conversations with who are interested. As you might imagine, a good deal of the industry has said, we're very interested, get the first one running, and then we want to talk. So that's, again, that's legit, and that's our position. There are some who want to move ahead and kind of be first in line, so we're talking to them as well. But our main focus is getting the first plant up.
Do you anticipate having to obtain local zoning permits?
I'm sorry, say it again, please.
Do you anticipate having to obtain local zoning permits?
Yes, but sort of the routine, if the ethanol plant builds something new on their site, they have to get some permits in place. We're working with the permitting people at Atkins, the expert on that, to make sure all that goes smoothly.
Thank you.
But there's nothing special or unusual or out of bounds from what they already have permits for.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Zeman.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
A few questions from your testimony and some that you just talked about. Green hydrogen, you reference it on page 4, line 4. First of all, what is green hydrogen?
Okay, so when you say green hydrogen, it means how it was made. Was there any CO2 released when you made it? Or in particular, was there CO2 from fossil fuel released when you made the hydrogen? So if there's no fossil CO2 released when you make the hydrogen, you're allowed to call it green hydrogen. And that is the only kind of hydrogen we're focused on.
Okay, and is that available in Iowa?
Well, you make green hydrogen. Primarily you make it, and you need to have zero carbon energy to make it. I know this gets a little complicated, so please let me know if I'm getting too technical here. But if you make your hydrogen using wind power, solar power, nuclear power, water power, then it's green hydrogen.
So you would be making the green hydrogen right next to the...
Exactly.
Okay. And I think later in your testimony, you talked about it would need a large amount of energy, but you need the large amount of energy to make the green hydrogen. Is that fair?
That's correct. It's 80% of the energy use of our process is the green hydrogen.
And then the water on the backside of it would be through that process to make green hydrogen.
Basically, you make green hydrogen by using electricity to split water into oxygen and hydrogen.
So when you say large amounts of green energy, what do you mean?
So for that 90 million gallon ethanol plant will need approximately 1,000 megawatts a year of green energy.
So would that require putting a wind farm immediately next to each of the facilities you want to go to?
It requires what it requires at each site. For some sites, the wind farm's already there and the electricity is not fully utilized. For other sites, we may need to put up some windmills. It really depends on the site and the details of our engineering analysis. And like I said, there may be sites where it's just not practical or not practical in the short term.
So it could require substantial additions of wind farms,
It could.
transmission lines, all those type of things, depending upon site to site.
Yeah, and again, we see it like a raw material. If you're going to build an ethanol plant, it costs a lot of money to put up everything you need to do to build the ethanol plant. Similarly, if you're going to build our kind of methanol plant, you may have to invest substantially in renewable energy in the area. And it's figured into, when I gave you those numbers about revenues and profits, it's figured into that there will be capital expenses required to make enough renewable energy to run our process.
And then I think you answered it in one of your answers, but you can use intermittent energy. you can turn it on, turn it off type of thing? Because green energy, typically speaking, outside of nuclear.
I'm sorry. I could you get a little closer to the mic? I apologize. My hearing aids are not working well in the room. So
no worries. I'm just trying not to breathe on the mic. So green energy, typically speaking, is intermittent. Is that a fair statement? If it's not nuclear, it's an intermittent source of energy.
Yes, that's true.
Does that cause any issues with your operation? I think you said you can turn it up or you can turn it down.
You can, and we have a substantial ability to adjust it to the current flow of electricity. For example, at Atkins, nuclear energy at night is substantially cheaper than nuclear energy during the day because there's no competition at night for the energy. So we will be doing a substantial amount of processing at night and just leave it sort of at simmer during the day for that reason, because it reduces the cost of the electricity.
And you wouldn't use any traditional electricity? When I say traditional, I mean non-green electricity in this process?
Yeah, actually the process doesn't care. These are all distinctions we make for decarbonization purposes. We have certainly discussed facilities where we'll start with, fossil energy, sell conventional methanol, which is nowhere near as profitable as green methanol, but still is profitable. And while we wait for green energy upgrades in the area. And again, it will depend on the economics of a particular site. I don't want to try and generalize across the whole industry.
Okay. And I'm pretty sure I heard you say the only facility you have is going to be in Illinois, and you don't have any facilities here in Iowa. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But you would like to get into the Iowa market?
Absolutely. And as we're saying, we've talked with a number of Iowa ethanol plants, and so far they're in the category of, we're very interested, show me one working, and then let's talk.
And it would be fair to say you would be a competitor for anybody that wants to use CO2 for any business model.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Okay. I have nothing further. Thank you.
Ms. Colas?
Good morning, Mr. Bonar. I'm Jean Colas with Colas Family Farms, and I just have one question.
Oh, okay, very
I'm way
good.
back here.
Gotcha.
Would there be an economic benefit to the state of Iowa by?
I like the metaphor of my partner, my engineering partner in Poland, whose company invented the technology. He talks about the Midwest, where Texas is sort of the center of fossil fuel in the United States. He thinks the Midwest will be the center of renewable fuels and bioenergy and the next generation of fuels. And I think that's right. Iowa is superbly positioned to be leader in that world that's emerging.
And they would receive compensation for that.
Absolutely. Our core to our business model is we share the compensation.
Thank you very much.
I believe Mr. Dublinsky is yours up for question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Bonar, I just want to make sure I understand a couple of things you've talked about with some
Sure.
of the parties here. Is CAP CO2 actually going to be making the green hydrogen?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're doing both?
Yep.
Okay. And the numbers that you've given on electricity use, for example, include both parts of that process?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're clear on that. Your direct testimony at let's see if I can find it here. I apologize. I have the lines written down and forgot to write the page. Looks like it's page 6. lines 11 through 14, and you were talking about sort of the key to this being green methanol and green hydrogen is how it's made, that the source of electricity needs to be a green source, right?
Yes.
And you list there wind, solar, water, nuclear, and geothermal. Are you aware that there are no operating nuclear or utility scale geothermal plants in Iowa?
I am.
And are you aware that in the footprint of the proposed Summit project, that several counties have moratoria on building new wind turbines and solar farms?
I am.
You were talking with Mr. Jorde about the fact that no new transportation infrastructure would be required, but for the output of the green methanol, it would require additional rail cars, correct?
The same rail cars can be used. They have to be clean between usage, but that's a pretty standard facility in amidst the ethanol ecosystem.
Right, but you're not reducing the amount of ethanol being made, correct?
That's correct.
So this is an incremental addition, this additional product line, an incremental addition to the amount of rail cars that would be needed leaving that facility.
That's right. At scale, that will be the case.
Right. Disney Cruise Lines and Maersk Shipping don't fuel in Iowa. And this is going to have to go somewhere else.
Well, it'll go to the Gulf Coast where a lot of the ethanol already goes.
And you were, let me ask you, have you calculated how many additional rail cars that will require?
Well, you could do the, so if you have 90 million gallons of ethanol, making 63 million gallons of green methanol, so another 66% rail cars. So there will need to be more rail cars. Yep.
And to be clear, you're a commercial competitor of Summit and other carbon capture projects, correct?
Yeah, I guess. But, you know, yeah. Okay.
No further questions, Your Honor. Board Member Marks?
Mr. Bonar.
Yes.
You spoke with Mr. Jorde about water usage.
Yes.
Including the hydrogen process, what is the net usage of water? So if you get 100 gallons into the process, how much of that distilled water is actually coming out?
It's I don't know, it's about 30 or 40%
Is leaving?
is leaving of what comes in. And again, we're now into some engineering details, but yeah.
And on page 4, lines 14 through 15 of your direct testimony, you state that there would be no environmental damage in the event of a spill of methanol.
That's one of the great things about methanol is as soon as it hits the ground or water, it decomposes. And it's unlike something like gasoline, which has many, it's a complex molecule with a lot of additives. Methanol is really simple and it breaks apart quickly. Within 15 minutes, it's all dispersed. So that's
my question is, if that spill were to be within the vicinity of animals or people, would that be dangerous?
It's pretty minimal because again, I'm not the expert, but one of the reasons why green methanol is so attractive as a next generation fuel is that it's far safer than the kinds of fuels that are used now.
So methanol is not toxic to people?
Well, methanol is toxic. It's wood alcohol. It's the kind of thing, that's dangerous. So you need to handle it with the same safety provisions that you would handle ethanol. But it's if you spill it, it disappears really quick. And that's again, for the shipping industry, that's a key attraction for them.
Understood. Thank you. No more questions.
Sure.
I do have a few questions, just because this is kind of an interesting technology. You stated here that all the rules have not been issued when it came to the tax credits. Do you know when these rules are expected to be issued?
Some are expected in the next month or so, and then there's one more that's expected towards the end of the year. And which is which, that's not my area of expertise. And again, I'm not building my business around it, so it's not crucial. We just see it as icing on the cake.
Okay, so you said your business, so that was one of my questions too. Where is CAP CO2? Where are you based out of?
It's a Delaware C Corp. I'm based in New York. We have one employee in South Dakota. We have one employee in Chicago, one employee in Washington, Iowa.
So there seems to be a theme about Delaware. Why Delaware?
Oh, because if you're taking professional money from either investors or banks, they like Delaware because it's a standard. They know the law. They have lawyers already trained in the law, so they like it. It's actually a lot of extra trouble for us to do a Delaware court, but it's what our investors insist on.
So you do have investors then?
Yes, we do.
And is the facility in Illinois, are you going to treat that like it's a pilot program?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you're looking to expand that pilot program into other potentially Midwestern areas. So the equipment's been demonstrated in Poland working next to a cement plant, which is much dirtier, nastier CO2 to deal with. Once we have it up and running at an ethanol plant, we intend to start building those shipping crates and delivering them as fast as we can to other ethanol facilities. So I'm just curious on these shipping crates. So to me, I'm envisioning, and correct me if I'm wrong, the shipping crate contains all of the equipment needed. You have your inputs, you get an output, and inside the shipping container or the container, you have all the equipment needed to make the chemical transformation of the inputs to the output.
Exactly.
And so, did I understand you correctly? There's like a lifespan to this shipping container? Like it needs to be replaced or not?
It's 20 to 25 years, sort of standard industrial equipment.
So we hear, whatever industry it may be, there's a lot of talk about tax credits. Would this be possible, and would you be pursuing this if there were no tax credits?
I probably would be, and it's a good business. The only thing the tax credits sweeten for us is it makes it more attractive for investors to come in now early rather than once it's up and running. So it's a sweetener. It's sort of working the way it's intended, that it incentivizes new businesses to start more quickly, that do a better job of capturing and upgrading the CO2. And I'll add to that Europe, because I have good contacts in Europe, they're terrified at what the IRA has done, because all the European companies are coming here to sell their technology because those incentives make it easier to get their systems up and running. So Europe's kind of scrambling to do something similar in support. So it's working. Those incentives are definitely working to get new technology up and running quickly.
And so you're talking about new technology related to carbon capture.
Correct. That's correct. Sorry. Yeah. So not that was critical to our business model, but just in general, it's part of the momentum and the wave we're riding.
And then you talked about the green hydrogen needs to be, produced at site, and you did a good job defining what green hydrogen is and, how it's made. So if you can't guarantee that the electrons were green, it cannot be considered green hydrogen. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it's not considered green methanol either. So we can't sell it for the premium that Maersk and shipping companies are paying right now.
Okay, and I do a lot of work with electricity as well, and you know that unless the renewables are right there, you can't track green electrons on the grid.
I do understand that.
Okay.
I do.
And so that would present the need to have that on site, that renewable energy, so you can guarantee it. Or not necessarily on site, but even if it was remote, that you can guarantee it's coming in.
Yeah, we have to be able to guarantee that it's coming in, and we will have to certify that to sell it as green methanol.
Mr. Dmlinski had an interesting statement, I feel, at the end that he asked you, are you a direct competitor with Summit Carbon Solutions? And you stated yes. Could you be a partner?
Sure. Anywhere where there's where there's a lot of CO2, bio CO2 from an ethanol plant, we could upgrade that to green methanol.
Could you take CO2 off of their pipeline and have a standalone facility that processes that CO2?
Yeah, technically we could do that. And again, the business proposition has to make sense for both us and the people. Again, we're not real comfortable with a pipeline that was put up with eminent domain. So, again, you're obviously into a very delicate business discussion here, but in general, the idea of a CO2 hub and being able to leverage CO2 that's been collected from multiple sites and do it in one place, that's attractive and interesting. And we'd love to have conversations about that.
So this is a startup business, correct?
That is correct.
And like with any startup business, do you have a vision of growth?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And what is the end goal? Like how big?
Well, certainly the bulk of the ethanol industry. We're also in discussions. There's other ways our technology could be used. Manure processing plants, though that CO2 is nowhere near as clean and attractive as ethanol CO2. Wastewater treatment plants. We're also very attractive for wind sites that have lots of spare energy, and they want to, well, what do you do with all that spare energy? You don't want to just throw it away. Well, you could be making green methanol on site, and that's essentially storing the energy that couldn't be used otherwise. So those are potential future areas for growth. Right now we're focused on the ethanol industry.
Just have to ask, could there ever be a moment where your growth is such that it would make sense for your company to have a pipeline?
Well, I'll give you one example of, let's see, can I talk about this? Yeah, I'll talk about it theoretically.
Sure.
You could imagine a facility where our equipment's installed and up and running, and a nearby ethanol plant would want to get in on that deal. And they would make an arrangement with the landowners between the facility or on some public right-of-way to build a pipeline to get their CO2 to the already operating facility. And that's a model that we've already had discussions about.
What about a pipeline to the Gulf Coast to transport? If you're producing that much volume of methanol, would there ever be potential for that?
I suppose it's possible. That seems pretty far out there,
Sure.
Seeing as the rail car infrastructure is already there.
Okay. Oh, thank you for answering those questions. And
Sure.
Thank you.
You bet.
I have no further questions from the board side. Ms. Ryan?
Just a couple of follow-up questions.
Sure.
You indicated that you could sort of size up varying the number of shipping containers. So would it be possible for an ethanol plant to sell some of its carbon dioxide to a company like, for example, Air Products, and then some of it to you for
Sure, and we expect that to happen. That again, like the methanol buyer told us, they're sitting on a gold mine. That bio CO2 is really valuable and will be essential as the as the economy decarbonizes. That'll be more and more essential because you do need CO2 to make lots of things. So if you start with bio CO2, that's the ideal scenario. So it'll be valuable, and we'll be competing with others. And that's part of the game. We're getting into business here, so that's the way it works.
And along similar lines, when you were discussing the tax credits, you used the word negotiate, splitting the tax credits. So would that be a situation where you would actually negotiate perhaps even different values with different ethanol plants?
Yeah, it's possible. And again, it's sort of tied up with the business arrangement that the ethanol plant, the way it's structured, how it works. Atkins is owned by a farmers cooperative. The farmers cooperative supplies most of the corn. So there's some complexities there that determine whether you qualify for certain tax credits. So again, without getting into all the stuff we're paying lawyers a lot of money to sort out for us, it just has to be crafted to make sense and to follow the rules.
And one other thing you mentioned is that if there's an area where you don't have immediate access to substantial green electricity, that you could go ahead and produce the hydrogen and methanol and then have methanol for sale that just wouldn't be green methanol.
Correct.
If, say, a public utility in an area got 85% or more of their electricity for their service territory from a clean source, would that be meaningful?
Right now, it's very strictly enforced. It's either all renewable or it's not. Whether that, I could certainly tell you that there's lots of people at that methanol conference who would like to be able to split the difference and say, okay, well, we're only going to get 85% of the benefit of green methanol, so it's only 85% green and 15%. So I don't know how that's going to play out. It's really hard to know.
All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bonar, and you may step down.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for coming.